Edwin Canistraci here with a discography review of Alice Cooper. Every studio album by Alice Cooper, and that includes the band Alice Cooper and the solo artist Alice Cooper. That might confuse some people, but I'll get into that in a minute. But first things first, let me just talk about my history with Alice Cooper, a brief history. I first was aware of Alice Cooper, like a lot of people probably from my generation, with the song and video for Poison from the Trash album, 1989. And I saw that video, and I had like a general like knowledge, like because my mom, she was a cocktail waitress in Atlantic City back in like the late 60s and early 70s when she was young, and she played a lot, she was a waitress at a lot of nightclubs and stuff, and she had once told me about Alice Cooper's band actually played at one of the places where she was working, and he had the snake, and she said he had the snake on stage and all that. So I knew a little bit about him, and I remember seeing an ad for the movie Monster Dog when I was a child, and in the 80s, and I think that was like the mid 80s. And I remember it seemed scary to me, and he seemed scary, but yeah, I was somewhat intrigued. But I don't recall, like in the mid '80s, you didn't really hear his music much on the radio. I might have heard "School's Out," but I don't. Be honest, I don't really remember. The first time I remember hearing that song was like in the early '90s on a Simpsons episode. But when he really, came under my radar in a big way was when I was in junior high and I saw the Poison video. And yes, there were some very attractive women in that video. It was a sexy video, and he seemed like a cool guy, and it was a great song. I still think it's a great song. And I ran out with my allowance, had my allowance money, and I bought Trash on cassette when it came out. And I'll be honest, I was disappointed in it. I thought it was all right. There's a few good songs on it, but compared to a lot of other albums I was getting into for the first time, like this 89, there was a lot of stuff going on. Like, I had gotten into Aerosmith and AC/DC, and had already been using Columbia House to go back to their back catalog, and I was getting all their albums, and Guns N' Roses were really big, and also there were I was just starting to get into thrash with the Injustice for All album, Metallica, and I started using Columbia House to get some Metallica stuff, and Testament, which was another band I was getting into, and there's just a lot of great music at that time. Trash didn't really hold up. It was like, I felt like Poison was still a great song, and there were a couple songs, which when we finally get to that, I'll discuss. And I'll discuss maybe my opinion about that album has changed over the years. We'll find out. But for the most part, Trash was just like, it was all right. I didn't hate it, but it wasn't it wasn't going to do the same thing that AC/DC's Who Made Who or Aerosmith's Permitification did. It didn't inspire me to explore his back catalog. Let's just say that. So, that's one thing you got to remember, especially to any younger people watching this video. There was a time, because I'm part of a generation that was like right on that cusp with technology. Like my teen years, the internet, wasn't really a thing. And it wasn't until like my early 20s that, I had a computer and started using the internet and stuff. So I kind of remember, I'm kind of I think younger generation Xers and older millennials might know what I'm talking about, where you kind of had it both. Like you kind of saw the end of an era and the beginning of a new era. So I was right in that group of people, that last wave of people that remember a time before the internet and how you listen to music. And the importance of the Gateway album cannot be stressed more during this time period, because especially if you were a teenager and you just had like a part-time job or allowance, it was like $15 to buy a CD or $10, buy a cassette. So you were very careful of how you spent your money, and you could only do the Columbia House scam only so many times before they caught on. So if you bought that first album by an artist and it wasn't so hot, you weren't going to waste your money or your Columbia House scam. You weren't going to waste it, stocking up on their back catalog, because you were like, hey, so you kind of had like one chance to really kind of wow me. And if you didn't do it, then, you moved on to someone else. It wasn't like nowadays where you can go and sample anything, any artist by anyone. I mean, it wasn't even like, it started to be like that by the late 90s and early 2000s. And that's then how I discovered back catalogs. And that's for artists that I didn't really realize were perhaps better than I had given them credit for. So, but in the very late 80s, 89, that was it. Like, if I didn't like your new album, I wasn't going to spend the time and money to go and find out how awesome maybe your earlier albums were. But things changed, and in the 2000s, which was a very exploratory time for me, as you know from some of my other videos, that is when I started to dive into 70s Alice Cooper. And it was really the 70s stuff that I had discovered in the 2000s. That's what slowly made me become a fan of his. But like in 89, I didn't know much. I mean, the first time I heard No More Mr. Nice Guy was the Megadeth version from the Wes Craven movie Shocker. So I don't think I heard his version until like maybe the mid or late 90s. And I think that might have been one of the first things that put him back under my radar. Like, I heard that on classic rock radio or something and was like, oh, this original version is pretty good. Maybe I should check out Alice Cooper, give him a chance sometime. So anyway, even so, I wouldn't say I didn't like dive into him in quite the same way I dived into the new wave of heavy metal. It's been more of a slow burn. I've grown. Now Alice Cooper is one of my favorite artists, and I love him. I think he's great, and I think he's done a lot of great albums with the band, the original band, and as a solo artist. But it wasn't, it took years. Like, now, actually, this pandemic was kind of the final thing I needed to have happen to complete the Alice Cooper collection. Like, I didn't have all of his albums until just like 2 months ago. Finally, because I had more time on my hands and I was at home, I was like, you know what, I should really have every Alice Cooper album. So I had gaps. I had a lot of his best albums, but there were definitely some gaps in my discography and in my collection, and I've thus filled those gaps over the past 2 months, and now I do own every Alice Cooper album. And as a result, I thought, hey, let's do a video. Now, because some of these albums, I would say some of the albums in the 80s and his first album, well, the band's first album, and some of the later stuff from the 2000s, these are albums I haven't lived with for a very long time. Like, I've only just heard a couple of them for the first time in the past couple months. So my opinion might change with some of this stuff. But and then the 70s stuff, it's pretty much locked in there. But so this is all subject to change. But this is how I feel about Alice Cooper's albums after deep diving in the past few months during this crazy pandemic time. I decided to deep dive into Alice Cooper, and this is what I feel about all of his albums. Now, to explain the difference between Alice Cooper the band and Alice Cooper the solo artist. The band, which was formed in the late 60s, Alice Cooper was the lead singer of it, and Vincent Furrier, is that how you pronounce his name? He's an Italian guy, but I don't know too many Furriers. It's Furier. So that was the name. But he took the stage name Alice Cooper, which was also the name of the band. So that gets a little confusing. It also worked out really well for him, because then when the band broke up, he can keep calling himself Alice Cooper, and casual fans would not know the difference. So, hey, kind of a smart move on his part. But the band, it was actually also the band name. So the singer was Alice Cooper, and the band was called Alice Cooper. And they did a lot of his most famous material from the early 70s is with this band. So there you go. So hopefully that cleared up that confusion for you. So the first album, Pretty's For You. For the first album, Pretty's For You, 1969, produced by Frank Zappa. What kind of produced by Frank Zappa? Apparently the story is Frank Zappa discovered the band, he liked them, thought they were cool, kind of freaky. He was into it, Frank Zappa likes the freakiness. And he puts them in a studio one day, and he leaves his brother there to kind of record them while they're rehearsing. So the band rehearses, and then after a couple hours of rehearsing, Frank Zappa comes back and say, okay, that's the album. Done. And the band was like, what the fuck? And Frank Zappa's like, hey, I'm Frank Zappa. That's how I roll. So essentially, this first album is the band rehearsing in a studio, and then they edit it in a way to make it sound somewhat like a cohesive real album. Granted, a very experimental psychedelic album. And this was an album I had sampled it and listened to it a few times, but I didn't own it until just a couple months ago. And when I first listened to it, I was like, the band's it's not really working for me. It just sounds kind of like a pretentious wank off. But I gotta say, it's kind of grown on me, and I was really grooving to this last night. I was listening to this album last night, and I don't know, it's just like maybe my taste is changing. I'm starting to appreciate weirder things. But this album, I think it's really cool. It's not for everyone. It's definitely not a first Alice Cooper album to buy. But if you're open-minded to, the weirder side of psychedelic rock, then this is definitely worth getting. And there's not too many. There's a couple songs that kind of are real songs, but for the most part, it's a lot of snippets and experimentation, and then some jammy stuff, like just kind of hippie psychedelic jamming stuff. Sing Low, Sweet Cheerio. That's kind of a real song. Living is really cool. I like that song a lot. Fields of Regret. Levity Ball is probably my favorite song on this. It's a very raw live recording. It's funny because even though the recording is very raw and it's live, it sounds like it's like the most accessible song on the album. So leave it for Frank Zappa to use a really raw live version of the catchiest song on the album. So that's interesting. But there is a quality to this raw live version that I really like. There's something really haunting about it. So I dig that. Reflect It, which was the single from the album, and it's probably probably the second catchiest song on the album after Levity Ball. And I could see why it was picked. If you had to it was kind of tough finding a single from this album, so I could understand why they picked this one. A couple of years later, they would redo this again as Elect It on $1 Babies, but we'll get to that. Apple Bush is cool. So this has really grown on me, and I dig it. It's definitely not a great introduction to the music of Alice Cooper, but once you've gotten into it and you want to hear them wave their freak flag and do some cool experimental stuff, then check it out. That's what I think. And then we get to 1970, Easy Action. Now, their third album kind of gets all the credit for being like the big jump forward. Like Bob Ezrin, the producer, comes in and shapes them up, and finally they do like an album with like hooks and better songs and all that. And that's true to a degree. And I don't want to get into what I think about the third album yet. But I feel like this album deserves a lot more credit, because really I think this album is the first really big jump. I mean, compared to Pretty's For You, there's no question this is a lot more of I wouldn't call it conventional. It's still experimental, but there are definitely more songs on this album, what we would think of as a song. And the band, it might not be full-fledged hard rock, but it's definitely more hard rock than Pretty's For You. There's definitely a sound that's starting to solidify with this album, and I think it's great. I love this album, and I think it should get as much credit as the next one, the third album, for being the breakthrough album for the band. And Bob Ezrin's not producing this one, so you can't say it's all just because of Bob Ezrin. As a band, they're getting it more together, and they put out an album that's more cohesive and more melodic and has more hooks than the first album. Like, this is a big jump, a really big jump, I think. And I mean, right out of the gate, Mr. Misdemeanor, which is a great song. Shoe Salesman, my favorite song on this album. Very lush, really pretty melodic pop rock song, kind of early 70s pop rock. Sounds a lot like something like Paul McCartney would do. In fact, Alice is singing very differently than how we would hear him sing later on, except for maybe on a ballad. He's singing in a very McCartney-esque manner, and it's a very charming, melodic vocal line. And it just shows you the range, and that Alice Cooper could sing in a lot of different ways, ways that perhaps he wouldn't sing as much this way later on. But he really nails it. It's a beautiful song. I really like it. I like the lyrics too. And Return to the Spiders. Now that's some proto heavy metal there. This is a really heavy track, and definitely foreshadows the next couple albums. And that's great. And A Beautiful Flyway is another song kind of similar to Shoe Salesman. Very pretty pop ditty with Al singing and McCartney-esque vocals. And it's really nice. And then, you have some experimental stuff. But I feel even the experimental stuff is more concise and has a more of an impact than it did on the last album. This is a major jump forward. Even though I've grown to like the first album, this album is definitely much better. And it's a great album. I think it's their first great album, the band. And more people should listen to it and give it a chance. Then we get to the third album, 1971, Love It to Death. Now, this is the album most people cite as the true beginning of the band, where they really get it together. I think it's Easy Action. But there's no doubt that this album definitely didn't take things even further in that direction and create an even more concise, hard-rocking, melodic, hook-laden masterpiece. That's right, masterpiece. I love this album. This is one of my favorite Alice Cooper albums. A lot of people love this album, as they should, because it's a flawless album. Everything's about this is working. And Bob Ezrin, I have issues with some of his later production, as we'll get to, and I think he's somewhat overrated as a producer. But hey, I can't fault him for anything he did on this album and perhaps the next one, because this is a great production and it builds on what they were doing with the last album, Caught in a Dream. Man, what a catchy song. Caught in a Dream is one of the catchiest things, one of the catchiest songs you ever hear. Very Stonesy, kind of bringing in a Stonesy kind of element, Rolling Stones type element. Then you have the second track, I'm 18, which was the first big hit for the band. What a great song, like a real swaggering atmosphere. You know, and this is like kind of a Detroit thing, because Alice Cooper, and with their first two hippie albums that they did with Frank Zappa, they went to California and did that stuff. But here they went back to Detroit, back to their roots where they came from. They went back to Detroit, and like, all right, like that does add an element. That's why it's more hard rock and a little more swagger, and they get a little more of their own identity. And there is something about these artists. I love artists from Detroit, especially this period. But I love a lot of artists. I like early Ted Nugent and Bob Seger, MC5. Grand Funk Railroad's Michigan, it's Flint, but it's in Michigan, so it's close. But in Funkadelic, and you got Motown, and there's just a lot of great music came out of Detroit. And I think actually I'm 18 reminds me, it's kind of like a more commercial, concise version of what Iggy Pop was doing, Iggy and the Stooges. You know, it sounds like I could see Iggy and the Stooges doing a version of I'm 18. It'd be a little rawer if they did it. Yeah, I'm 18 definitely has that Iggy and the Stooges kind of swagger to it. Very Detroit, very young, tough, angry guy strutting around town. Love it. Love the smoky atmosphere and vibe. Very macho and cool. Dig it. Black Juju, great primitive kind of heavy metal, but kind of trippy, almost like the Doors got a little heavier. Very cool song. Is It My Body? Catchy, funky rocker. Love it. And my favorite song on the album, Bow to Dwight Fry. Dwight Fry. Did I say that right? Anyway, Dwight Fry. Whoa, man, is this an epic track. And it's like dark goth country. I don't know, that's what I call it. It's Alice Cooper, pure Alice Cooper. One of his greatest songs, one of the greatest songs ever written. How could you not love this song? And it's one of the reasons why this is such a great album. But we got a lot of albums to get to, so let's keep going. We got 1971, Killer. Woo, Killer. Even better than Love It to Death. Wow. So this is another masterpiece, even more of a masterpiece. It's masterpiecier. And man, I love this. Actually, I'd say most of my Alice Cooper listening years, and I would say for the most part, there's objectively there's a case for this being the best album that Alice Cooper has done. And there have been many times where I thought, this is my favorite Alice Cooper album. It's only until recently that I finally caved in and admitted that this other later album is actually my favorite Alice Cooper album. But hey, I mean, when I'm listening to it, I think, no, it's Killer, you know. But then there's like two others I listen to, and they go, no, maybe it's this one. So I kind of bounce around. So, you know, sometimes this is my favorite Alice Cooper album. And there's an objective case. You know, I know art's subjective, but some art's a little less subjective than others. And there's no denying this album. And I'd say if you're a more hard rocking, heavy metal fan, this is definitely the first Alice Cooper album to go to. This is the perfect gateway if you're into that stuff. Now, if in 1989, even in junior high, because I was into heavy metal and hard rock, if I had listened to Killer first, I totally would have started getting a whole bunch of Alice Cooper albums on Columbia House. I totally would have done that scam for him. But because it was trash, that didn't happen. But anyway, Killer, as everyone, pretty much builds on everything from the last album, takes it to yet another level. Out of the gate with Under My Wheels, one of the greatest Alice Cooper songs ever. Still a staple to this day. He always plays it live. It kicks ass, you know, just from the beginning. Telephone is ringing. Oh man, so catchy. It's one of the catchiest songs. Just pumps you up and you just want to get going, you know? And you just want to drive that car and, you know, over that lady. Although in real life that would not be cool. But in a rock and roll song, it's fun. Yeah, it's awesome. Anyway, That song is one of the greatest Alice Cooper songs ever. Be My Lover's good. Halo of Flies. Ooh, now this is the epic on this album. And Halo of Flies could be my favorite Alice Cooper song. It's up there. It's an amazing song. I would say it's progressive. It's like kind of a progressive hard rock song. Like there's progressive rock, but there's not a lot of progressive hard rock. Maybe a little bit of like Rush's early albums, like their first, like their second and third album, I'd say are kind of, well, second, third, and fourth, I would say are kind of progressive hard rock. But this is kind of a unique subgenre. Hawkwind, I'd say, is kind of progressive hard rock too, where it's kind of both hard rocking and kind of artsy at the same time. So you could still hear a little bit of that Frank Zappa experimental influence in this song, but not at the expense of hooks and heaviness. This song takes you on a trip from the very beginning to the end. It goes on a musical trip. There's even kind of a My Favorite Things kind of part in the song where he sings in a melody that's similar to that, and that's actually my favorite Christmas song. So there you go. I'm not a huge Christmas song fan, but I always loved My Favorite Things, although I guess My Favorite Things really started off, it's a song in what's that, Julie Andrews dancing around, The Sound of Music. So that's not even really a Christmas song. They just use it in Christmas sometimes, so maybe that's why it's good. So Halo Flies is great. Desperado, amazing song, not to be confused by the Eagles' Desperado, which is also a good song, but this is even better. Desperado is apparently inspired by Jim Morrison, who Alice Cooper knew, and the Alice Cooper band, I believe, opened for the Doors a few times, and Alice Cooper got drunk a few times with Jim Morrison, which is pretty awesome. And Desperados, it has that vibe. It has the Jim Morrison kind of vibe, and it's about him. And it's cool, creepy, atmospheric kind of song. I love it. And then you have You Drive Me Nervous is great. Dead Babies, another epic. Two epics on this album. And it's cool. It's about dead babies. So how can you not like that? Because that's just pretty hardcore, and it's cool. And again, kind of like I said about Under My Wheels, in real life, dead babies aren't cool. It's very sad. But in a rock and roll song, it's fucking awesome. So there you go. It's fantasy. We're just having fun here, and that's the thing. It's dead babies, but it's kind of fun. It's not a depressing song. It's rocking and it's fun. It's like Alice Cooper's like, it's like going into a haunted house ride, and you're having a good time, and it's a little spooky, it's a little freaky, but no one's gonna get sad, no one's gonna get depressed. It's a party time. It's a party haunted house, and Dead Babies is a lot like that. And then we get to the next album, because I gotta really shoot through these. I'm looking at the time here. Ooh, definitely gonna be a two-parter. Anyway, 1972, School's Out. Okay, I like this album. Don't love it. Like it. And I never loved it, but I always liked it. It's funny because I guess this is probably, maybe, I would say, I don't know if it's the most popular album. I think the next one's the most popular one. But this is probably the most known just because the title track is arguably the most known Alice Cooper song. Maybe it's this, or maybe No More Mr. Nice Guy, I would say, from the next album. But this that's an anthem, and it's a good song. I like School's Out, but I don't love School's Out, the song. It's a good song. It's a good rockin' song, but I don't know. If anything, this is the album where you start seeing Bob Ezrin, super producer, kind of emerge. And this is where he kind of starts taking over the band a bit, and you could see, this is now the guy that will go on to do, Destroyer and The Wall. This is the guy that wants to kind of be like George Martin. He wants to be like George Martin. He wants every band to be like the Beatles, and he wants every band to have their Sgt Pepper. And this might shock a lot of people, but I do love the Beatles, but actually Sgt Pepper is my least favorite Beatles album. Now, I don't hate it, but to me, it's like the Beatles go to Broadway. I explained this a bit in my Soft Parade review. And normally, I'm not a big fan of concept albums, for the most part. There's a few exceptions, as you'll learn as we get deeper into the 70s. But I'm not a big fan of concept albums, and I don't like too many bells and whistles, and I don't like when a band sounds less rock and more Broadway. Now, and literally, they do West Side Story stuff on this album. So there's a little bit of that, coming into it. The last couple albums, for Easy Action, Love It to Death, and Killer, they're they're rock albums, they're rock and roll albums, maybe experimental, maybe a little weird at times, but they're rock and roll records. And this is for the most part, but it is rock and roll goes to Broadway in a few moments. And it definitely foreshadows where Alice Cooper will go with his solo career in the mid and late 70s. And that doesn't mean there's not some great songs. I love the second track, Looney Tune. Man, Looney Tune's a great song. Has that Detroit swagger to it that I was talking about earlier. Love that song. Mid-tempo, cool, groovy rocker. Then they do their West Side Story stuff, which I'm not so crazy about. Blue Turk, that's a cool song. A little cool, Fender Rhodes. Public Enemy, number 9. Love it. Second favorite song in the album. And that's a swaggering, funky, hard rock jam. I love that song. And then they do some wanking off at the end, which is one of the things that knocks down this album. I'll be honest, it's really mainly because of the Looney Tune and Public Enemy number 9 that this album, that I like it. If it wasn't for those two songs, it wouldn't be quite so hot. So this is definitely, in my opinion, the weakest album of the Alice Cooper band. I don't know. I might even put Pretties for You over it for the most part. Although there's nothing on Pretties for You that I like as much as Looney Tune and Public Enemy number 9. But overall, this feels like what happens when you let Bob Ezrin and perhaps Alice Cooper, the singer, take over the band a little too much. And then we have the next album, 1973, Bill and Dollar Babies. Now, Bill and Dollar Babies is like, to me, sounds like maybe some of the band members felt that about the last one. So this is kind of like the compromise. This is the album where you get a little bit of that Broadway stuff and a little bit of the production that Bob is pushing on them, but at the same time, it sounds more like a band than the last album, and it's more hard rock but more importantly, just has better songs, in my opinion. Song by song by song, this is flawless. In fact, this is the other album that sometimes there's 3 albums that bounce between my favorite Alice Cooper album, and this is another one. There have been times where I thought, I love Killer, but I think Bill and Dollar Babies is the best one, or my favorite. I don't really like saying best, but it's my favorite. And there have been times where this is my favorite Alice Cooper album, and it's close. And I'd say it kind of depends on your mood. If you're in a more hard rocking, raw and ass kicking mood, then go with Killer. But if you want something a little more ambitious and a little more majestic and perhaps a little even more melodic, then go with this album. In fact, I say if you have someone in your life that's more into like pop or perhaps like alternative rock or glam rock, like David Bowie stuff, then this is the album to first give to them. This is the album that would get them into Alice Cooper, or at least some of his stuff. And because this is kind of like, I would say this is kind of their Alice Cooper bands like Ziggy Stardust. And it's a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest albums ever recorded, in my opinion. And let's just go track by track. And of course, oh man, right out of the gate. I know I say right out of the gate a lot, but it's a cool phrase, so I'm sticking with it. Hello, hooray. Hello, hooray. What a great way to start off an album. There's a pageantry to it, but yet it's still rocking and deep and dark. Like this doesn't sound like Broadway to me. It just sounds like more like theater of the macabre, It's just much cooler. Then you got Raped and Freezing. That's a great song, kind of stonesy, really catchy. Really love it. Elect It, which I'll be honest, I probably like Reflect It better, but this is still cool. I like it. It's a cool song. It's a little bit like Alice Cooper Goes to Broadway, a little bit, but still it's catchy enough that I'll let it slide. Bill and Dollar Babies. Whoa, the title track, one of the greatest songs they ever wrote. Really catchy. It's both heavy and funky at the same time, which I love. Not a lot of people can do it. Aerosmith pulled it off. Some early Ted Nugent was able to pull it off, but not usually. It's a hard thing to be both heavy and funky at the same time. Zeppelin sometimes did it. But anyway, this song does it. It's funky and heavy and dark, and the lyrics. I love all the dark humor from this band. I'm really into dark comedy, and you got a lot of that. You got that in spades with Alice Cooper, both the band and his solo career. But I love that song, Unfinished Sweets, a really cool song with cool. I think that's like a distorted bass line with like a wah-wah pedal. At least that's what it sounds like to me. No More Mr. Nice Guy. I said probably rival School's Out for the most known, most popular Alice Cooper song. Like I said, I was introduced to the song with the Megadeth version that was in Shocker. and I thought that was a cool song. I actually ran out and bought the Shocker soundtrack because of that song, and it was cool. But now, even though it's an all right cover, there's no comparison. The first one is much much better. There's a lot more color and nuance to it. The music, it's ear candy. It's just, I would call this almost pop rock, but it's pop rock with an edge. It's really catchy. It's really melodic, but it has a bite to it, and not just in the lyrics, but also in the guitars and the sound. And Alice's singing, which is at an all-time high. His singing just gets better and better. His vocals are so cool. I really love his singing. Generation Landslide, another amazing song, masterpiece, as good as anything the Beatles have done, in my opinion. Amazing song, acoustic, experimental, then kicks in with some guitar, very melodic, love it. Sick Things, and badass song. Love this song with this weird horn coming in and out. Really cool. They're doing like some cool Beatles shit, but in their own unique, dark way. Marianne, which is a nice kind of calls back some of those sweeter sounding McCartney-esque songs on Easy Action, Marianne. And I like that. You get to hear a little piano and Alice singing in that nicer voice of his, and that's a nice ditty. And then of course the big epic I Love the Dead. It's kind of like the Dead Babies. I love the Dead. What an amazing catchy song, and it's great. So this masterpiece, you have to own it. It's an essential Alice Cooper album. It's just an essential hard rock album, period. Then we have 1973's Muscle of Love. Okay, so Bob Ezrin is not the producer on this album. The band decides to, okay, we've done enough with this big production thing, and let's just get back to just being a basic hard rock band again. I always love when bands do this. It's like when AC/DC did like Flick of the Switch after like 3 albums of Mutt Lange. This is like that type of album. Like, hey, let's just get back to basics. We know how to do this. Let's just go into a studio and let's rock. And the results are great. It's another classic. It's another one of my favorite Alice Cooper albums. I love Muscle of Love. Just straight up catchy, like, they still write a really catchy tune right out of the gate. Big Apple Dreamin', in parentheses, hippo. I don't quite get the hippo in parentheses. That might be some kind of inside joke. Not a big fan of things in parentheses. I've said this before. But, I just call it Big Apple Dreamin' because that makes sense with the lyrics. Such a catchy song. Very catchy. Very hooky. Never been sold before. Oh, man, really catchy. Got the horns. I like actually their use of horns. I'm not always a big horn guy. I do like the horns on some Stones and some early Aerosmith, and they use the horns in a very similar fashion. So I do like how they use the horns. They're not overpowering, and they add to the groove. And Never Been Sold Before. Such a catchy song. My favorite song on the album is the next one, Hard Hearted Alice. I love that they reference Alice's name in the song. It starts off like a majestic ballad, very kind of trippy, kind of a majestic, dark ballad. And then it builds. It's an epic song. It gets hard rocking, and it has a lot of different parts. And it's an amazing song. It's like, God, these guys have a lot of great songs. I really love that. Crazy Little Child. That's again, Alice Cooper trying to be a little like Paul McCartney with his kind of what John Lennon used to call his, his grandma song, something like that. His granny songs, I think that's what they called him, where he does something that's like something from like the 20s or 30s, and kind of ragtime. Actually, I think this one, it's very ragtime. That's, I guess, the proper way of, the proper term. But it's cool. It works. I like how it works with the rest of the album. It's nice for a little change. I wouldn't want a whole album of stuff like that, but it's cool for one song on like a hard rocking album like this. Working Up a Sweat, that's great. Muscle of Love, the title track. Hard rocking. Love it. Man with the Golden Gun, a rejected song that was supposed to be for the James Bond movie, The Man with the Golden Gun. Not one of the better James Bond movies. In fact, I would say, it's probably the worst from the 70s. Has Christopher Lee in it, though, and Tattoo from Fantasy Island, so that's cool. But, not one of the better ones. But, James Bond movies are kind of like PC. Even when they're, not that great, it still services. And this song should have been in the movie because it's a lot better than the one they ended up using, the Lulu song, which was not one of the better James Bond songs. And this was much better, so I don't know what they were smoking. They should have used this. This was a cool song. Teenage Lament 74. Man, what a melodic, beautiful little pop rock song. Really catchy. Love it. Woman Machine, another good hard rocker. Love this album. It's great. I love the Alice Cooper Band. I hope they stay around forever. I hope they don't break up because they're really good. They're great. They're a great band. Don't break up. They break up. Okay, so that's it. No more Alice Cooper Band. Bummer. And they never really get back together. They play on some of his more recent albums, but it's like just for a track or two. And they did an EP, but that's it. There's no more real Alice Cooper Band. Fortunately for the singer, Alice Cooper, casual fans don't even know that that's the name of the band. So he can launch off in a solo career and not miss a beat, commercially speaking. And he doesn't with the next one, his first solo album, 1975's Welcome to My Nightmare, which I guess would be the most well-known Alice Cooper album, or maybe across the board. Definitely his most well-known album as a solo artist. And it's a good album. Not great, in my opinion. Now, this is like, some Alice Cooper fans might not like some of the things I have to say now from this point on, because I feel his solo career, even though I love Alice and I always think he's a cool guy, and he still has done more than enough great to good albums from this point on to justify his existence as an artist and as a solo artist. I just want to get that out of the way, that I love Alice Cooper, and even though I do prefer, for the most part, the stuff with the Alice Cooper Band, I am still glad Alice Cooper continued as a solo artist and made a lot of great music. That being said, I do feel he is somewhat inconsistent. And sometimes, like, one album will be really good, sometimes not so good, sometimes great, sometimes there's a few bad ones thrown into, which we'll get to. So I don't think he's the most consistent artist, but he is a prolific artist, and he's always put out stuff. He's never gone too long without releasing an album. There's one period in like the mid-'80s, but even then it wasn't that long in the grand scheme of things. So I always have respect for Alice Cooper. So just keep that in mind when I perhaps trash some of his albums. No pun intended. This album is a very beloved album too, and I don't hate it. I like this album, but I don't love it. I do like it more than School's Out. I think it has better songs than School's Out for the most part. But this is, now that the band's gone, now that they had their last hurrah of Muscle of Love, this is Alice Cooper as a entertainer now. I feel like now he's no longer the singer of a rock band, but he's an entertainer. Him and Bob Ezrin can just kind of do whatever they want. And as a result, this is now officially Alice Cooper going to Broadway. I don't mean officially, but this is Alice Cooper going to Broadway. This is him doing a different kind of rock music. This is more theatrical rock. This is, like, I guess, kind of closer to what Queen does, and then you would have on albums like Destroyer and The Wall that Bob Ezrin produced. This is theatrical rock opera, concept rock, which for the most part I'm not a huge fan of. I prefer the more straight up stuff. But first song, the title track, Welcome to My Nightmare, I do dig it. Really cool song, real groovy, has a kind of Doors groove, which I like. Sounds a little like something that would be on the Salt Parade, which I love. I love that album. So I like that song. Then the second song, whoa, Devil's Food. Devil's Food's my favorite song on the album, and that song kicks ass. It's really heavy, and it's got full production, but it's not overproduced. I mean, it's still heavy. This is like the only song that's really heavy on the album, in my opinion, and I love it. And so far, and then the Black Widow, which it's kind of like a two-part song. I kind of feel like the Black Widow is the second part of the song, and there's kind of a bridge with Vincent Price, which is cool. Vincent Price talking, and I like that. And the Black Widow is a really cool, heavy song. And so you're thinking like 3 songs in, hey, pretty great, pretty great. What's my problem with this album? Well, kind of starts with some folks. The 4th track, All Right. It's an all right song, a little old-fashioned kind of 50s rock and roll sounding song. It's all right, but not as awesome as the first 3 songs. And then you have The Ballot, which is nice. I do like Only Women Bleed. Only Women Bleed is a very, very pretty song about spousal abuse. And but I do like it a lot. I like that song. It's really, I guess, it's the second side. For the most part, there's a cool few songs. Department of Youth's catchy. It's a catchy kind of anthem song. Sounds a little like something that would be on Destroyer a few years later, or 1 year later. So that's all right. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little hard on this album. I'm looking at it now and going, it's definitely better in School's Out. And it might be better in Pretty's for you, too. But I still give the others an edge. I guess it's really about the last 4 songs that kind of leave a kind of taste in my mouth. I'm not a big fan. I know a lot of people love Steven. I'm not a big fan of it. It's all right, little piano. That's where it's like too like Broadway for me. You know, the concept, the little boy and the monster comes, and it's like playtime stuff. I'm not really into that. And The Awakening and Escape, you know, I just prefer just cool, you know, tunes rather than the concept. I'm not a big fan of the whole concept stuff, and it leans more into the concept with the last few songs. So that's probably why, even though I always start off like, yeah, this is a cool album, by the end I'm always like, you know, not as cool as the Alice Cooper Band, but still a good album and better than the next one. Okay, 1976, Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. That's the full official title of it. Alice Cooper Goes to Hell, but most of us just call it Goes to Hell. There's a guy I'm friends with on Facebook. He's a cool guy, Bob Reed. And I'm sorry, Bob, because I know you love this album. You said it was your favorite Alice Cooper album from the 70s. Well, I'm sorry to say, Bob, even though I think you're an awesome guy and you have an awesome wife, you got an awesome group on Facebook, this is my least favorite Alice Cooper album from the 70s. He has made worse albums later on, but this is easily, in my opinion, the bottom of the barrel of his 70s work. It's a big drop off from Welcome to My Nightmare. And that album I just liked but didn't love. But yeah, Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. Don't get me wrong, there's a few songs I do like, which I'll get to. But this is like everything I wasn't crazy about, they doubled down on. And there ain't no devil's food on this album. The last album was Rock Goes to Broadway. This is Rock Goes to the Hollywood Squares. You know, this is like real variety music, you know, variety show kind of sounding music, which is fun. It's kitschy. Hey, I like Paul Lynde and variety shows from the 70s, but, you know, it's kind of not what exactly I wanted from Alice Cooper. But this is also when Alice Cooper did start appearing on shows like the Hollywood Squares and stuff, and the Muppets. And it sounds like that. This sounds like Muppet music. You know, Go to Hell, the title track, one of the better songs on the album, sounds like Muppet heavy metal. There's heavy metal, and then there's Muppet heavy metal. And this is Muppet heavy metal. You Gotta Dance. Oh, really bad Alice. This is disco, but this ain't cool, coked up rock disco like I Was Made for Loving You, or cool walking through Central Park kind of jivey disco blues rock like Rolling Stones' Some Girls, or hell, going through the, you know, on roller skates, you know, being sexy and flirting with some girl who's chewing gum. Do you think I'm sexy? Disco. No, this is full-fledged, solid gold, lame ass variety show disco. This is, you know, Paul Lynde could be dancing to this song. Yeah, you gotta dance, baby. That's what this is. This is variety show disco, and it sucks. And Alice should be ashamed of himself. I'm the coolest. Not big fan. It's all right. It's, again, variety show stuff. Now, the two best songs on this album are back to back. Didn't We Meet? I love Didn't We Meet. That's my favorite song on the album. That's just a great, catchy, melodic pop rock song. Really catchy. I really love the lyrics too. Clever lyrics like that. And I like the ballad. I Never Cry is a really nice ballad. You know, Alice Cooper, he sings a really good ballad. You know, it's not one of the things, I talked to a few people about this on Facebook. You know, a lot of us agree. We think Alice has a beautiful voice for ballads. He's kind of a crooner. And yet, you know, Alice has this cornball, old school entertainment side, you know, entertainer side of him. You know, I'd say he's like Vincent Price meets Groucho Marx meets Jim Morrison. You know, that's kind of all rolled in one. But, you know, the dude, he's also got a little Rat Pack in him. And, you know, and like the Rat Pack, he could croon a nice ballad. And I Never Cry is a nice pop rock ballad, and it's a really pretty song. Then the rest of the album, it's like Rocky Horror type stuff, which is all right. I like Rocky Horror. I love Phantom of Paradise, one of my favorite movies, but still not exactly what I'd want for Alice Cooper. And yeah, and then by the end, I'm Always Chasing Rainbows. This is also like Gene Simmons' solo album when he sings When You Wish Upon a Star. It's this real 70s cornball. Like, this is what happens when people have too much drugs and too much money, and they kind of lose themselves. And that's what this album is for the most part. It's Dante's Inferno meets Disco Inferno, and it's you know, I don't hate it, but it's definitely my least favorite from the 70s. And then we got the next one, 1977, Lace and Whiskey. 1977, Lace and Whiskey. This album I love. Okay, now this is where it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself a bit, because this is still, Bob Ezrin is still producing this, and it's still very Rock Goes to Broadway. And, you know, I listen to this and I think, why do I love this album, but I only like Welcome to My Nightmare, and I dislike Go to Hell. I don't know. To me, I think the songs for the most part are stronger, especially in the first half. And I think there is a stronger hard rock element, especially on the first half of the album. I mean, the first track, It's Hot Tonight. Woo! That's a scorcher. That's a great, funky, hard rock song. It's one of those songs that's both funky and hard rocking at the same time. And that it doesn't sound like just a product of the studio. It sounds like a band playing. It's just a great hard rocker, more straight up than anything on the last two albums. So it's a great start. And then Lace and Whiskey, that's a really catchy song, has a nice swagger to it. You know, it's very slick, a little pop rock, but I like it. It's catchy. It's about lace and whiskey. Really catchy song. Love it. Road Rats. Whoa, now this is hard rock. This is really hard rocking, you know. And it has even though it has a little piano in it, but even that's like funky, and the whole thing's just. But it has a little bit Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street kind of vibe, you know. It's real smoky and rocking. Oh, I love it. I love that song, Road Rats. Damn If Do, yeah, it's all right, rock and roll. You and Me, beautiful ballad. In fact, this is my favorite. No, it's my third favorite Alice Cooper ballad from the '70s. You and Me, one of my favorite love songs from the '70s. Alice, it's just beautiful, almost pretty much easy listening. Like, this is a song Barry Manilow could have done, but I like some Barry Manilow, and this is a really beautiful song. It's kind of a working class love song about a guy and his girl, and they watch TV together and they have a beer, and it's just like that's life, you know. It's just like everyday life with your lady. And it's a really touching song, and it's one of the songs I like to play with my woman. Then the second side, not as strong as the first side, but I still have a soft spot. Something about this album I really like, so I kind of cut it a little slack in a way that I probably shouldn't, because King of the Silver Screen is pretty corny, and it does a lot of the kind of stuff I don't like from the last two albums. A Bongy Stomp, No More Love at Your Convenience. Yeah, that's disco-y, and it has a chorus of women singing. It sounds actually like a decent song. Like, if Alice's vocals were more prominent and they didn't have as many vocals, you know, backing vocals throughout the song, I feel like it would have been a better song. But they kind of ruined it for production. I never wrote the song, so that really sounds like Barry Manilow. But it sounds like a good Barry Manilow song. And, you know, sometimes I contradict myself, but because I like some Barry Manilow, even though I say I don't like Broadway sounding stuff. But I think it also comes down to the quality of the songs too. And that's a really nice song. And then My God's a cool song. I didn't like it at first, but it's grown on me. And it sounds kind of like Arcade Fire, which is interesting. So I wonder if Arcade Fire was inspired by late '70s Alice Cooper. It's a possibility. So anyway, Lace and Whiskey, an album I love more than I probably should, but I really do love it. And then 1979, the last Alice Cooper album from the '70s. From the Inside. Remember when I said that there was an album that in recent months I finally confessed, okay, I confessed to myself. It was a self-confession to myself. This is my favorite Alice Cooper album, even though I objectively realized that Killer and Bill and Dollar Babies were stronger albums, and sometimes I do prefer them. But I don't know, these days, maybe it's because of the pandemic, and maybe because I feel like I'm on the inside. From the Inside is currently my favorite Alice Cooper album. And again, this is going to sound like contradiction because it's a concept album. It's actually, I think, his strongest concept album, not just in quality, but it's actually like, it's a real concept album. Like, it's not just a few songs here and there that link it. Like, every song is about characters in this insane asylum. You know, it's a bunch of characters. It's very Broadway. It's written by Bernie Taupin, Elton John's main songwriter. He's a very good songwriter, and he's using most of Elton John's band. So essentially, this is like an Elton John album with Alice Cooper singing it. But it is a personal album because Alice Cooper had spent time in an insane asylum right before he did this album because he had a mental breakdown between drugs and alcohol and the pressures of fame. Because of all that, I forget the details. I forget if he checked himself in or someone else checked him in to the insane asylum. Definitely let me know if you know. But anyway, so this is a personal album that he co-wrote with Bernie Taupin about his time in the insane asylum, which so I think that gives it an edge on most concept albums. And again, to me, I'm about the songs. I think another reason why I love this album besides the fact that Bob Ezrin, actually, I always assumed he produced it, because it kind of fit in with the other ones in a way. But then I looked and no, he didn't actually produce this. So maybe that's why it's good. Because by this point, Bob Ezrin was doing a lot of coke and his stuff was really overproduced. Another thing I'm going to shock a lot of people with this, I'm not a big fan of Pink Floyd's The Wall. I much prefer all their earlier albums, and I think The Wall is very overproduced. It has some good songs, but again, it sounds like Sgt. Pepper sounds like the Beatles go to Broadway. That sounds like Pink Floyd goes to Broadway. But this is something more. I just think this is a stronger album. So me, I'm more of a from the inside guy than a Wall guy. So Bob Ezrin, he can do his stuff with The Wall. I'm happy with this producer. Who was the producer? Let me find out. It was some guy named David Foster. Probably should know who that is, but I don't. If you know what other great albums he did, which I'm sure he did some other great albums, let me know in the comments section, because I would like to know. But anyway, he did a great job producing this album. I think the production's much better than on the last few he did with Bob Ezrin. I think it sounds kind of like an Elton John album, so I wonder if it was maybe Elton John's producer. I don't know, but it sounds great. From the Inside, great song. A little disco-y, but I would say more cool disco rock, kind of a hybrid, a little like Kiss did on Dynasty. And I like that stuff. I like when kind of disco and rock kind of combine, and the Giorgio Moroder kind of vibe. But that's cool. I dig me some Giorgio Moroder, so it has that kind of vibe. Wish I Was Born in Beverly Hills. Great song, great fun rocking song. Sounds like an Elton John song. Sounds like a good Elton John song. It's a lot of fun, rocking, really catchy, and that's great. And the Quiet Room. What a beautiful song. Probably my second favorite. If you want, yeah, I consider this a ballad. Alice ballad from the 70s. Great, great ballad. Beautiful song. Really dark. I really connected with this song during this time period. And it's all about him in his quiet room in the asylum. Nurse Rosetta, my favorite song on the album. Funky, real funky, swaggering, sexy, about this nurse of his there that he's starting to fantasize about. And I love this song. Millie and Billy, all right, little duet with some girl. Serious, cool rocker like that. You're Gonna See Me Now. You Gonna See Me Now is my favorite Alice Cooper ballad, love song from the 70s. A beautiful song, just beautiful. Just it's heartbreaking. I love this song. Had a great video too, promotional video they did for it. But to me, this is as good as anything Paul McCartney wrote, and I'm a big Paul McCartney fan. But this is just a classic, beautiful ballad. How You Gonna See Me Now? Hell, I could see Barry Manilow singing it, Frank Sinatra even. I could see a lot of people. It sounds like just a standard. This song should be a standard. It's an amazing song, and that's, I think, why I love this album. It just brings the songs. It brings it. It's not just about the theatrics and the pose of doing like a concept album. It's an album that has something to say with really rich characters and situations, and above all, the songs are all just really melodic and memorable. And this is why I keep find myself going back again and again. Like I keep wanting to check myself into From the Inside. It's an amazing album. For Veronica's sake, a song about him wanting to go back to help his dog. I believe his dog's named Veronica, and that's a cool song. Jackknife Johnny, about this vet. And then it ends with Inmates Were All Crazy, which is probably the most kind of theatrical sounding song on the album. But it's a cool way to end it. It kind of fits it with the themes. And I just love this album. And did I say 79 before? It's actually 78. If I said 79 before, sorry, it's 78. But that's why I'm looking at Wikipedia, and I should get more on top of that. But this is an amazing album. And maybe a few months from now, I'll go back to St. Killer and Billion Dollar Babies are my favorite, but right now it's From the Inside. It's helping me. It's helping me through the lockdown. I love this album, and it's a great album to play for people who perhaps like pop and Elton John and stuff like that, and show the many different sides. Alice Cooper is a lot like David Bowie, in my opinion. He's the American David Bowie. He's gone through so many different changes, and he's kind of been I feel like post Wayne's World and Poison, he kind of got locked in as kind of being thought of as more just like a heavy metal hard rock guy. But he, as we're going to see in the next couple albums, and from this album, he's done all kinds of different music. And like David Bowie, I think a lot of it worked really well. I think he adapted to these different kinds of music, to the different genres, really effectively, and it's great stuff. His first album of the 80s, Flush the Fashion, it even says Alice Cooper 80, like it's a new model of Alice Cooper, which is a very kind of early 80s kind of thing to do. Flush the Fashion. And this is now no more Broadway, no more concept albums. This is just him now jumping on a trend. I guess you can say this is the beginning of Alice Cooper, kind of like the band Kiss, where he starts following a lot of trends. And this begins what I would call his new wave period. Alice Cooper has a new wave period. And then after that, he would have a heavy metal period or hair metal period. And then, then he has a brief industrial period, the turn of the century. But right now, this is his new wave period. And this album, it's pretty good. It's not as good as From the Inside, but it starts off really strong. You immediately hear the new sound with Talk Talk. Sounds kind of like the Cars or Devo. I hear mainly Cars and Devo influence on this album in the next couple albums. But it works. It's catchy. Clones, the second song and the main single from the album, really catchy. I love this song. Really catchy, fun, synthy, new wave song. Catchy as hell. Alice sings it great. I love it. It's really, really great. Smashing Pumpkins also do a good cover of this, but this original version by Alice Cooper is the best one. Pain. Woo! Pain. I love this song. Pain is my favorite 80s Alice Cooper song. And I guess it's a ballad, but it's kind of a mid-tempo rock song with a lot of heart. It's somewhere between a hard rock ballad and it's somewhere between a power ballad and a hard rock mid-tempo song. It's really powerful. It's really emotional. I love it. It could have fit on the last album, actually. This is the one song that I feel like could have been on From the Inside. But hey, it's great to hear it here. It's such a beautiful song, and his singing on it is amazing, and easily the highlight of this album. This is the only thing. I like this album. I won't say I love it because even though it starts off really great, those first three songs, it's like, wow, this is going to be an Alice Cooper classic. After that, it kind of goes downhill a little bit. It's not bad. There's really nothing bad, but it starts to be a little generic new wave. And after a while, it just, there's never really a highlight like Clones and Pain again on this album. But I do like it. I think it's a solid new wave album, but he would get much better with the next album, Special Forces, 1981. I love Special Forces, and I think it's one of his greatest albums. And this is an album I only started listening to a couple months ago because I didn't own any of the Alice Cooper albums from what this is called his blackout period. I believe that's what they call it, his blackout period, which are the three albums he did after Flush the Fashion, because Alice Cooper has no memory of making these albums because he was doing a lot of crack cocaine. So because he was doing a lot of crack cocaine, these next three albums are all kind of fuzzy and he doesn't remember making them. Well, he might have been on crack, but he was making some really cool music. I love this album. I think it builds on what the last album did and makes a stronger, it's a stronger statement. It's a stronger Alice Cooper embracing new wave statement. And it's both kind of more hard rocking and synthier at the same time. There's more synthesizers, a little more new wavy, but it has a little more of a punk punch, I feel, than the last one. It's a little punchier right out of the gate with Who Do You Think We Are? Catchy rocker, love it. Catchy new wave rocker. 7 and 7 Is, which is a cover of a Love song from the band Love, and that's a cool song. I love the original, but I think this is even better. I love Alice's vocals on it. They sound really cool, especially during the chorus. He's really singing the hell out of it. Prettiest Cop on the Block, really catchy, clever lyrics, really fun song. Don't Talk Old to Me. Wonderful song. So catchy. That's the thing. Everything about this album is really, really catchy. He's knocking out great song after great song. I don't mind. Not great as the original, but the Generation Landslide 81 Live, it's all right. Flows with the album. It shows that, hey, perhaps Alice Cooper did influence some new wave artists. I know he influenced some punk artists. I know Johnny Rotten was a huge Alice Cooper fan. So maybe Alice has a little claim to new wave. Same way David Bowie did, because glam rock and a lot of that stuff in the early 70s inspired this next generation rockers. And even the theatrics of like Devo and stuff, you could definitely see that Devo might have been very aware of like what Alice Cooper was doing in the early 70s. Skeletons in the Closet, very synth pop Devo-esque kind of song, fun, spooky, haunted house lyrics. Really cool song. I love it. Really catchy. Everything about this album's great. It's one of my favorite Alice Cooper albums. Really, really catchy. Then the next one, 1982, Zipper Catches Skin. Another one that I'd only just in recent months got into. And at first I thought this was good, but not great. But this one has been a grower. Now I do think it's great. Not quite as great as Special Forces, but for the most part, I do like it better than Flush the Fashion. I don't think there's a song as good as Clones or Pain on this album, but overall, I think this is more consistent and a little more hard rocking. This is actually more of a stripped down kind of almost new wave, more the punk side of new wave than the synth pop side. And Zorro's Ascent, which is a song about Zorro, and it's kind of silly. I mean, you could tell he's doing a lot of drugs here because there's some weird subjects for songs. The next, but that's a cool song. I like Make That Money, Scrooge's song in parentheses. I feel it'd be better without the parentheses and just be called Make That Money. And it's got a great chorus. Make that money. Make that money, honey. It's almost like Wu-Tang. I love it. It's hard rocking, swaggering, a lot of satire, a lot of dark humor. I love it. I Am the Future, a really great ballad, a really great weird synthy kind of ballad. Really like that. No Baloney Homo Sapien. This song, it's a ridiculous title and chorus, but I love it. I love No Baloney Homo Sapiens. It's just, you want to sing along to the chorus, you know? It's like against all the bullshit. I really, really love this song. It's a great Alice anthem. It almost sounds like something he could have done back like on Bill and Dollar's Babies or something. It's like a classic Alice Cooper band kind of era kind of sing along. I really love it. It's a great song. Adaptable's great. I Like Girls, fun new wavy stuff. Kind of sounds like New Values, Iggy Pop, which I love. Tag Your It is great. I Better Be Good is great. It's all great. This is a really solid album. And if you like new wave or alternative rock, or if you like things like Talking Heads, but also punk rock as well, especially the Cars and Devo, then definitely check this out. But I also think if you like a lot of classic Alice Cooper band stuff, Killers and Love It to Death and Bill and Dollar Babies, I think you can find some elements, some connective tissue into this side of it too. And it's really great stuff. And it's a period of Alice Cooper's. I feel this early '80s period, just because he's on drugs, and he's on crack and he doesn't remember it, doesn't mean that there's not a lot of value to it. Because I think he's working instinctively, it's like a automatic, writing, something, or like a seance, something's guiding him to create great music. David Bowie doesn't remember recording Station to Station. That was a blackout album for him. He was doing so much cocaine and he recorded it in an LA mansion and doesn't remember recording that album. And in my opinion, it's his best album. So, just because an artist doesn't remember an album and perhaps has a negative view of that period and wants to distance themselves from it because it was like a dark time in their life, I understand that coming from them. But from us as listeners, we, should be a little more objective. And I feel these albums, these so-called blackout albums, should be they should be appreciated more as really important parts of the Alice Cooper canon. And I think they're some of his strongest albums. And then finally, this is the last album I'm going to review for part one, because this is the end of the blackout period, and I feel like this is a good place to stop, is Dada. Now, Dada is an album that has developed a cult following, and I get it. It's a really cool album. I like it a lot. I don't see why people gravitate to this more than the last two. I think the last two are stronger, especially Special Forces, but I do like it. This leans even more into the synth pop side. Bob Ezrin's back, so there's definitely a lot of drugs being done now between Bob and Alice. And because Bob Ezrin's back, a little level of pretentiousness is back as well, which he didn't have on the last couple albums, which I liked. They were punky and new wavy and kind of and funny and sardonic, but they weren't really pretentious. Where here a little bit of pretentiousness creeps in, but for the most part it works. I do like it. I think it's a little overrated as far as there's this little cult of Dada that has sprung out in recent years, but I still do like it a lot. I just prefer the other two albums more from this period. But the title track goes on a little too long. It's this cool synthy kind of intro, and I feel like it'd be better if it was half the time and be more of an intro than a full song. I love Enough's Enough. Enough's Enough is the first proper song on the album, is really catchy and also feels very fitting for these times if you listen to the lyrics. Formerly Warner's great song. No Man's Land, great song. Dyslexia, great. Scarlet and Sheba. I Love America is a really funny song. Fresh Blood's catchy, kind of attempt at a more of a R&B kind of pop song. Pass the Gun Around. Great song. Great way to end the album. I do really like this album. In fact, maybe one day I'll love it. Maybe it's a grower because Zipper Catch a Skin was a grower. So and every time I do listen to this album, I do like it a little bit more than the last time. But I still kind of like those other two albums better. I think they're a little more rocking and a little more straight up. But this is still a really catchy album, and it's a great way to end this very creative and underrated period for the most part for Alice Cooper. I think people should definitely check out these early 80s albums to hear another side of Alice Cooper and to hear that he was a very experimental vanguard artist who had moved very well at the times, even when he was totally cracked out of his head. And then after that, Alice Cooper, because he was doing so much drugs, he was pretty much, he had to clean up. And Dada was obviously like, that's like as far as you can go, like before you go, maybe I'm doing too many drugs, or maybe his wife came in. I don't know all the details, but it was time for Alice, a little like Aerosmith in the mid 80s. He had to clean up. And this led to a period of, what is it, like 3 years of no music by Alice Cooper. And this is going to be where I stop. And then we're going to pick up for part two. Part two, we will pick up Constrictor from 1986, where Alice Cooper is clean and sober and has his comeback. And I'll tell you what I think about that album and all the other albums leading up to his latest album. So we'll do that. That'll be a good part two, but we're going to end now on Dada. So this was pretty, from the first album to Dada, feels like a good kind of period to kind of have as part one. And again, I'd say definitely the best stuff for the most part is the Alice Cooper band stuff, and then these early 80s new wave albums. Although my personal favorite right now is From the Inside, and that's a great album to check out if you want to check out, in my opinion, his best late 70s solo album. And that's what I got to say about Alice Cooper. By all means, leave your comments, tell me where I'm wrong or where I'm right, and I'd love to hear from you. Later.